Well, ever since I was a little kid, I was fascinated by the textures and patterns of things. I was always touching stuff. I was the kid who got told, put your hands down, keep your hands to yourself. And so I make paper. I find bits of paper, I make them, I make patterns, I do wood block prints or stencils, or I hand marble it, use the old, from the about 700 AD, the old Turkish style of hand marbling paper. And I'll find papers too. And so like his shirt is one sheet of paper that was dyed, and his pants are another sheet of paper that is dyed. And so there's separate pieces, and his face and his hands and tail and his feet are all separate pieces of paper that were dyed. I make the sheets, like his shirt was much bigger than this, and I found the perfect area within that larger sheet of paper to cut out his shirt so that it was the bright color with this highlight in the right place. And like his hair, that's another sheet of paper. And so then he is a separate, almost like a paper doll. And then I make the little pad, the steno pad, and this pencil, and they're actual separate pieces of paper. Like the little eraser on the pencil is a piece of paper, and then the metal part that's on the pencil is another piece of paper. And that's actually inserted into his hand, so his hand's holding it to write. And this sheet is a sheet of wallpaper that I found that had that wonderful pattern, and I thought that would just be perfect for her blouse. And the guard is yet another piece of paper. And so they're all assembled, sort of like paper dolls. And then they're layered one on top of the other, like she actually exists and is on top of this character behind, and he's on top of her, and then he's on top of him. So they exist spatially as well. And this piece of paper actually inserted behind this other piece of paper, which is the wall, and then he's inserted just behind. You can, if you look really close, you can actually even see the little bump of his ear underneath the paper. And here's another one that has a piece of wallpaper on there. But the only piece of acrylic paint, for example, is like the highlight on the top of his jacket. The little highlights in their eyes or their ears. Just a little hint of acrylic paint. Most all of it is pieces of paper, like their little eyeballs. If you looked at my drawing table at home, you'd see all these little shirts and eyes and things laying about.
How did you come up with that technique?
Well, when I was in college, I minored in printmaking. Well, after graduating from school, I'm not a rich person, so I can't afford the presses and the machinery that you need to do that. But I still love the technique. And so, I started just thinking, well, I can get a big area of color by using a sheet of paper. And so I just started using sheets of paper to do the same technique that you would use doing screen printing, like for t-shirts. Well, I'm fascinated by words and pictures and how they relate to each other. Sometimes words spark an image in your mind,
right,
and other times you see a picture and then you start talking about it, or you describe what's going on. And we all describe things to each other, and it's part of our communication with it. And so I'm sometimes inspired just by conversations themselves, such as, like in poetry reading. Here in Oklahoma, we have a certain way of speaking.
Yes.
And so instead of saying poetry, with more syllables, sometimes it's just poetry. Poetry Poetry reading, right. and so I heard somebody saying that, and being hard of hearing, sometimes I will hear things and it sounds like something that they didn't say, but it sparks an image in my mind. And so I created a painting as a result, like poetry reading. I thought, well, okay, there's Big Rooster, and, he's pontificating some poem that he's written, and so that image pops into my head. Or sometimes
so in some ways, like a visual pun.
Yes, very much, and it's very much a conceptual joke, because we need language in order to just live life.
Right.
And stories are exactly how we orient ourselves to the world. And so jokes are a way to call attention to that communication. Well, you know, the miscommunications that happen when you're deaf, they're funny, and you could either take it as a bad thing, you know, like, oh, poor me, you know, don't hear so good. Or you could just think it's funny and turn it into something that's uplifting and happy. And, you know, I like to be happy. Yeah. And I like to be happy, and I like to make other people happy. And so I wanted to create things that would make other people smile and laugh, and that they could live with, that also had meat to them, so they could see things and discover things. You know, I love it when people will call me up, you know, they've owned a piece of mine for some 3, 4, or 5 years, and they'll call me up and, I just got the joke, this is hysterical. You know, and I just love that my pieces will grow over time. And so I wanted to share that happiness and that fun, and so that people could come home and they could get a bright color to cheer them up, and you know, that's just important. And humor helps us heal from illnesses. Humor helps us communicate better with one another. You know, because if I'm not so stuck up on myself that I assume that you are talking to me about this, you know, when you aren't saying anything of the sort, you know, if I calm that down and have a sense of humor, then you and I can communicate better. You know, we can understand each other. We can, you know, get along, and so you know, the miscommunication sparks a lot of my stuff, but then so does reading. So do things I experience and see in life. Like in this piece, for example, you know, I've been reading, you know, politics is a lot in the news these days. So this is kind of about that. It's titled Hogwash, which, you know, we hear a lot of things that are like, oh yeah, hogwash.
Truth-based, I love it.
Yeah, and so, you know, I've got this big pig, and he's got a bar of lye soap. There's some flip-flops, and there's a tube of toothpaste, and see the truth's leaking out here. And there's a mud pack. Yeah, and there's a mud pack. And then he's reading a book called The Fables of Mr. Facing Both Ways, which that comes from the old Pilgrim's Progress. He was that archetype of that two-faced politician kind of thing. And then if you could see around on the edges, you know, there's shampoo and palaver powder and a tall tail brush. There's lots of jokes on the edges and on the tops and the bottoms of them. But so that came from some of my experiences of politics and reading about culture, you know, here in America. But then, you know, we took a trip down to the Wichita Mountains, you know, the other day, and you know, in Mears, Oklahoma, there's a little restaurant there that serves burgers. Right. Well, I went to the bathroom while we were there, and in there they had a tile floor like this. And it was just like, oh, that's perfect. I got to put that in my painting. So a lot of life, you know, comes into these. Well, I'm currently working on a piece that will be titled Buffalo Gal Going Out Tonight. And yeah, you got it. That tune by Arlo Guthrie. Right. And so music is kind of an upcoming theme and plays on the images within music. Like another piece will be titled A Balladeer. A deer, you know, playing a guitar, and, yeah, with the antlers, and yeah, you got it. And you know, the use of stories in music, and that is a conveyor of information to, you know, the old ballad, you know, the poetry ballads, and I'm working towards a one-woman show at the state capitol, and so like Buffalo Gal Going Out Tonight. Well, that had to do with Oklahoma. Yeah. And our trip where we went to Mears, Oklahoma, we got to see a whole bunch of buffalo being rounded up, you know, by guys in pickups and SUVs. But they looked like they were dancing. All these buffaloes, you know, bouncing back and forth, and they looked like they were doing almost one of those line dances, you know, the country and western kind of thing. So that kind of sparked that idea. And so I'm enlarging on this theme of the narrative and how we communicate, how we convey information, and how we understand and form knowledge about the world around us. Because, you know, the ways we use words are important. But if we misapply or misuse or use them euphemistically, well, then it takes away from their meaning. And it's disrespectful to language and to the people you're talking with.